Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Our next panel is titled Rules-Based Maritime Order in the New Normal. This panel is moderated by Professor Tommy Koh, former president of the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea. Ms. Jane Chan from RSIS will also be co-moderating this panel. Our panelists for this session are Judge Park Jin Hyun, International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, His Excellency Ambassador Arif Habas Ugroseno, Indonesian Ambassador to the Federal Republic of Germany, and Senior Colonel Retired Zhou Po, Senior Fellow at Tsinghua University and China Forum expert. These speakers will be joining us virtually. We will also be using Slido for Q&A during panel discussions for this session. For physical attendees, please join us by scanning a QR code on the Slido brochure found in the conference folder. For virtual attendees, please type your questions in the Slido app integrated into the virtual platform. We will now invite Professor Tommy Koh to begin this session. Professor Koh, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to begin by thanking Admiral Aaron Beng, the Chief of Navy of Singapore, for inviting me and Jane Chan to co-moderate this important panel. As this conference is being held in a hybrid format, Jane will be stationed at the physical venue of the conference, and I will be stationed in cyberspace. We have 90 minutes for this session, and I want to divide this time equally into two halves. In the first half, I will invite the three panelists to speak for about 10 minutes each. And in the second half, I hope we will have a very good Q&A session. I want to make three introductory remarks. First, I want to make the point that COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on international transport. Transport by land and by sea have suffered grievous blows. Maritime transport has been the least affected. Now more than ever, international trade means seaborne trade. We must therefore do everything we can to protect the safety of navigation and the safety of international shipping. That's my first point. My second point is that our common objective is, in order to have peace at sea, we need to have agreed laws and rules governing the uses of the sea. The applicable laws and rules are contained primarily, but not exclusively, in the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. It is, however, not enough to have agreed laws and rules. We must also have compliance by the stakeholders with those laws and rules. And I'm sorry to say that not all countries are law-abiding countries. I go on to my third point. My third point is that we live in a troubled world. I see growing tension between China and the United States, China and Japan, China and India. And if I look to other parts of the world, I see tension between the United States and Russia. At a time like this, when there is trouble in the world, I want to make my argument that it is in everybody's interest to protect the integrity of international law, including UNCLOS. The reason is that international law and international institutions are two of the anchors of world peace. If we undermine the law, we will be in danger of living in a lawless world, and there will be no peace at sea in a lawless world. This is why we need a rule-based maritime order. I will now introduce the first of our three panelists, Judge Pek Jin Hyun. His surname is Pek, not Park. Judge Pek Jin Hyun is a very distinguished friend, professor of international law at Seoul National University. He has served as the Dean of the Graduate School of International Study, and he currently a judge of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea based in Hamburg. He served as the president of the tribunal for 3 years with great distinction. He is also a member of the International Advisory Panel of the Center for International Law at the National University of Singapore. It now gives me great pleasure to give the floor to Judge Pek.
Thank you, Ambassador Cole. I want to thank organizers of the conference for a kind invitation extended to me. In the past few years, international law and the rule of law were faced with serious challenges. Waves of populism, nationalism, isolationism, and extremist ideologies have gained ground on the earth. This trend has posed a serious threat to the post-1945 liberal international order based on international law and multilateral institutions. Now, with the new administration in the United States and renewed interest in engagement and multilateralism, were the challenges of the past few years merely a passing trend? Is the world now safer for the rules-based international order? Perhaps it is too early to make any credible assessment on these questions. Today, I will briefly reflect on what the state of international rule of law in today's world is. Then we may be able to see more clearly the challenges facing the international rule of law and what is required to strengthen the rules-based international order, including international. How do we achieve the rules-based international order? What requirements are necessary to achieve such order? I can point out three. First, a well-developed body of rules. Second, a well-developed body of institutions to implement, apply, and enforce such rules in a fair and equal manner. And third, a positive attitude of members of the international community toward the rule of law. Only when all three requirements are met and synchronized with each other, we can expect the rules-based system to function effectively. The first requirement of the rules-based international order is the existence of well-developed body of laws. Such law must be general, clear, and made in public. International law has made significant progress in the past several decades. Today, international law covers almost every aspect of international relations. International law is certainly general in the sense that it is accepted on a universal basis. On the other hand, international law is often criticized for being unclear and ambiguous. However, even in this respect, there have been significant improvements. Over the past several decades, the International Law Commission and the United Nations have contributed much to adding precision to international legal rules through codification and the progressive development of international law. The second requirement for the rules-based international order is a well-developed body of institutions. This is an area where international legal system is relatively weak compared with national legal systems. Yet even in this area, there has been some noticeable progress. A myriad of international organizations and agencies have been established in the past several decades to ensure the implementation of international legal norms. In addition, international dispute settlement system has been expanded and strengthened, especially with the multiplication of international courts and tribunals over the past several decades. And there was a substantial increase in the number of disputes submitted to such courts and tribunals. The third requirement for the rules-based international order is the positive attitude of members of international community, that is to say, the attitude of a state. There may be several factors in assessing the attitude of a state toward the rule of law, such as number of treaties to which a state is a party, the level of participation in international organization, or willingness to submit its disputes to international courts or tribunals. However, one may be more important than these factors is whether a state recognizes and respects international law in its everyday interaction with other states. I think that international legal consideration now plays an important part in the decision-making of many states in their relations with other states. At the same time, one cannot fail to notice some troubling trends in this regard. Several states are reluctant to respect and abide by key international norms. They are unwilling to commit themselves to multilateral agreements. They often prefer to resort to unilateralism and disregard international institutions. Thus, as far as the third requirement is concerned, the picture is mixed. Overall, however, I believe that the rule of law exists in international relations today. If we put the international legal development of past decades in perspective, I would say that international law has greatly expanded, international institutions have considerably strengthened, and rules-based international system has matured significantly. This analysis can be applied to international maritime order as well. The rules-based maritime order likewise requires three components. First, a well-developed body of laws. Second, a well-developed body of institutions to implement, apply, and enforce such laws. And third, a positive attitude of the members of the community toward the rule of law in the ocean. For the first component, I can point out that the law of sea is one of the best codified branches of international law. Of course, the centerpiece in this regard is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, but the scope of the law of sea goes well beyond the convention. Numerous international agreements have been adopted to address various aspects of the use and protection of the oceans. As far as the second component is concerned, institutional arrangement to ensure the implementation of international legal norms may be more advanced in a maritime area than in many other areas. A number of international organizations and agencies play an important role in this regard. In particular, UNCLOS is equipped with an effective dispute settlement system, which has been widely utilized so far. Such a system is instrumental in ensuring the rule of law in the world's ocean. For the third component, I can note that many states accept the need for and the benefits of rules-based maritime order. A large number of states have joined various international agreements relating to the use and protection of the ocean and refer to the law of the sea in their policymaking and interaction with other states. The law has been submitted to international courts and tribunals. In fact, maritime disputes have been the most popular subject of international adjudication only next to trade disputes. Now let me say a few words about the maritime order based on UNCLOS. Almost 4 decades after the adoption of the convention and 27 years after its entry into force, it is my assessment that the ocean regime created by the convention has worked fairly well in promoting the rule of law at sea. The convention has almost achieved universality with 168 states parties so far. Since its entry into force, 2 additional implementing agreements have been adopted, and the third is currently underway. The UNCLOS regime is stable, yet flexible enough to accommodate any necessary changes. That there is no problem, challenges, or practice that deviates from the provisions of the convention. There are many. Often tension arises and conflicts break out over them. However, the convention has been successful in creating the expectation among states that the rule of law exists and operates across the world's oceans, and that justice can be done for all states, big or small, strong or weak, developed or developing. The comprehensive dispute settlement system of the convention has played a significant role in this regard. Perhaps the most emblematic aspect of the rule of law is that a small state is able to institute a legal action against a bigger and more powerful state in international courts or tribunals. This is something which happens frequently and of others. In closing, international law and the rule of law may not completely transform the world, but they are crucial in maintaining a certain degree of order in this world. In particular, they are crucial to maintaining peace and stability in the world's ocean. I believe that international rule of law is one of the most important achievements of the international community since the end of the Second World War, and now constitutes one of the pillars sustaining international order in our time. We cannot afford this pillar being undermined by various challenges we have witnessed lately. We have to safeguard this pillar and make every effort to do so. Thank you so much for your attention.
I thank Judge Peck for a very important statement. I'll introduce our second. He's a very good friend, Ambassador Arif Havas Ugroseno. I will call him Pak Havas. Pak Havas is one of Indonesia's best diplomats and international lawyer. He is currently based in Berlin as Indonesia's ambassador to Germany. Before that, he was the Vice Minister for Maritime Affairs and played a major role in helping Indonesia develop its ocean policy. Prior to that, he was based in Brussels as Indonesia's ambassador to the European Union, Belgium, and Luxembourg. It gives me great pleasure to give the floor to Pak Havas.
Thank you very much, Prof. Tommy, Ambassador Tommy, Pak Tommy. Judge Paik, Jin Yun, great to see you again. And Senior Colonel Zubao, Ni hao, how are you? And of course, I saw and Jane also moderating this event. Let me first of all extend my thanks to the organizer to invite me to have a discussions on this very important event and very timely, I would say, in the context of the coffee today. I agree with what Judge Paik mentioned about the importance of international law, the importance also of rule of law in the oceans, and also the importance of UNCLOS. as well as the development that have shown us that the ocean governance is very much intact. I want to also to offer you another point of view based also on practical experience that I had here as ambassador in Germany. But before that, I would like to give a little bit of observations of the world in this challenge of the pandemic of COVID. I found that we are not ready for global pandemic, apparently. We can see it from clearly the absence of effective global leaderships when we have this global pandemic starting. If you recall, WHO declared a public health emergency all the way back in 30 January 2020 last year, but UN Security Council only met in April 9. They still continue meeting in January, February, March on physical meeting. They only started to have a sense of the crisis, and it's a bit ironic because they are in New York, and New York is also one of the epicentrum of COVID. They started to have online meeting only in the 24th of March last year, and only on the 9th of April, Security Council discussed potential impact of COVID. So they still discuss potential impact of COVID to conflict-affected countries 3-4 months, after WHO declared it's a public health emergency. It's quite disconcerting, and it seems that the seats of permanent member of Security Council is just a piece of furniture. I'm sorry I have to say this, but they did not act very, very quickly. We also see that in terms of international institutions, countries are withdrawing from WHO, for instance. Again, it's an evidence of absence of effective global leaderships. And we have seen the rise of populism, the rise of authoritarianisms. We have seen also global inequalities, especially in terms of the vaccinations. Even until today, we see a global inequalities. And we see closing of borders. It's we have never seen this before. Borders are being closed. Borders are not only physical land borders, but also airports, seaports, relevant to our discussions today, are being closed. Okay, I will get to my experience on this border being closed a little bit now, but I would say that in my observations, the pandemic is being addressed not on the basis of science, but on the basis of your passport. So this is quite disconcerting. We're looking at the issue of globalizations, the issue of human movement that has been pretty much unimpeded for a very long time. And now when we saw these threats at global level, we look at not the science, we look at the passport. So it's very unfortunate. So there are at least in terms of the UNCLOS, there are at least 4 issues that depend on the interpretations. May or may not be seen as violations of the conventions of the law of the sea. The first one, it pertains to the crews of vessels. Okay, I had to work with different countries and different operators to save 2,575 Indonesian sailors who are scattered in 7 vessels across Mediterranean who were not allowed to, to dock. So they were very scared. One of the vessels even charged the food instead of giving them salary, because they have already. We have to negotiate with the owners of the vessels, and those vessels were owned by German companies. They are very responsible. So we managed to, because they were trying to board in Greece, but the government refused they to dock and to board, which they argue that this is in line with the Articles 8 and 25 of UNCLOS on the right to control entry. But then again, Article 94 and 98 UNCLOS also mention about the duty of states to protect life at sea. So life at sea is not only life at sea and EEZ, but life at sea at those vessels of just 2 miles from your shore, they are at sea. So technically speaking, they are at sea, and they are no medical access, no salaries, food unlimited. They are in the confined spaces. They are very stressful. Different aspect of quality of life have reduced dramatically. So this is one big issue that we see, and in our part of the world, we all see the Diamond Princess. Remember the case? And now it's been seen that actually, if you allow them to impart and treat it properly, then the infection would have not gone from one person to 600 in just less than a month. And also the case of the vessel of Rajaratnam was completely not allowed to enter the port. So in my case, we managed to brought them to Hamburg on different dates, and then we negotiate with the German government. We deal on the health access, and when they arrive and dock in Hamburg, all the medical staff of German government, from federal government, and also from the local Hamburg government, they help us, and finally we send them to Indonesia by charter flight. So this is a case that I actually handle myself, and when we had these discussions, it was kind of frustrating because there are operators who just simply don't care. They just ping pong us. They just simply forget about law of the sea, forget about protection of life of people at sea. They just look at profits. So this is one of the really unfortunate situations coming out of the COVID. Second, resources, notably fisheries. OECD survey have shown that in July last year, there were 13 RFMOs, regional fisheries organizations, and 9 OECD members. They responded that over 2/3 of RFMOs, they reduce persons. They reduce ability to inspect. They don't do inspection anymore. They don't even go to the office anymore. They cannot have access to the tools at the office. They cannot do monitoring at all. They cannot do monitoring of the ice anymore. So 92%, of the RFMO said that they have experienced disruptions in their regular scheduled activities. And 84%, they said that the COVID has disturbed the regular decision-making process. So the incidence of illegal fishing went up in different places because there is no policy. So this is another impact of COVID to the convention law of the sea and also to the sustainable and biodiversity issue. The third one on the issue of piracy, really on the maritime security issue, Prof. Tommy. UNODC reported that piracy in West Africa and Gulf of Guinea went up 98 incidents in the first half of 2020. This is a jump from 78 cases in the whole 2019. So in the first half of 2020, it jumped to 98 cases in West Africa and in Gulf of Guinea. 81% of vessels are being boarded, 10 attempted attacks, 6 vessels were fired upon, and kidnapping of 50 plus crews in this particular area. So why? Because there is no law enforcement going up, navies are not well equipped, nobody is doing patrol. So this is direct impact on maritime security of COVID. We never thought about this before, that this COVID will have this kind of impact, but apparently this is what would happen. The last part that I see here in Europe and probably in our part of the world as well is the rising of human trafficking. Yes, the border is closed, but there is less policing the border. In some very remote area, there is not even a police at all. So they change the routes. They go from Africa with the vessels, sea, endangering people at sea, and then they will go to the land and go to different places. And the number is very much increasing. So these are actually the real life situations that we see today in terms of the impact of COVID in the new normal. So if this new normal, Prof. Tommy, continues, new normal meaning less policing at sea, continue to have closure of the border, less law enforcement at sea, then the new normal will have a long-term impact of the UNCLOS itself. I think member of the Law of the Sea needs to see this in the future discussion, already start to think about this, on how this COVID could impact the implementation of UNCLOS in the long term in the future. So with that, just an initial idea. So I hope that give us issue to think through, and hopefully coming out from the discussions, we can also see what are the positive steps that we can do, what are the measures that we can do domestically, regionally, and globally to reduce those impact of COVID to implementation of UNCLOS. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Pak Havas. Of the 4 issues to discuss, I want to give you some good news on the first issue concerning seafarers who are stranded at sea. It's a very big problem. And I'm happy to inform you that the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore has taken the lead to help them. It has negotiated a protocol with stakeholders which enable these ships to dock in Singapore for the seafarer to land in Singapore and to be repatriated. So I hope other ports will emulate the good Singapore of the Port of Singapore, because it's a very serious problem for hundreds of thousands of seafarers who are stranded above us. I would like now to introduce our third speaker. He is Senior Colonel Zhou Bo from the People's Republic of China. Senior Colonel Zhou had a distinguished career in the PLA and retired with the rank of Senior Colonel. Among other things, he had served as a Chinese Defense Attaché to Namibia. He's currently serving as the Senior Fellow of the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University in Beijing. My good friend Fu Ying recommends him very highly. So Colonel Zhou, the floor is yours.
Still muted, Colonel.
Cannot hear you.
Yes, now okay?
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Yes, thank you, Professor Go. So nice to see you again. In some other venues other than Shangri-La Dialogues where we met so often. And I'm really honored to be invited back again to attend the conference in Singapore, even if I'm retired now. This topic, I suppose, is most interesting in that it is about rule-based maritime order in the new norm. First of all, when we talk about rule-based maritime order, we can only think of UNCLOS. But when I think of UNCLOS, I'm thinking about what the Chancellor of the German Reich, Otto von Bismarck, once famously or infamously said, laws are like sausages. It's better not to see them being made. For me, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is probably the longest sausage ever made in history, because it took more than 140 countries 9 years to negotiate this treaty to make this longest sausage. So that is why, for us to make this sausage, we have to reach compromises, and ambiguities could be flexibly interpreted. Anyway, that has ratified UNCLOS as early as in 1996, unlike the United States, which so far haven't ratified UNCLOS at all. But they believe that they would behave like the guardian of the international law, for example, of freedom of navigation and overflight. China believes that American military activities, such as closing reconnaissance and surveillance, could not be simply characterized as freedom of navigation, while the United States maintains that its military activities fall within the freedom of navigation and other international lawful use of the sea. It is important for me to point out that China is not the only country that has a different interpretation, unlike the United States, of the freedom of navigation and of flight. At least there are some other 25 developing countries who also have restrictions regarding military activities in the exclusive economic zone or contiguous zones to varying degrees. What do I want to say? What I want to say is that such difference is understandable. But the United States, based on its own interpretation of the UNCLOS, would behave as if it is the chosen guardian of the maritime law. And who has chosen you to be the guardian of the law? According to Pentagon, from October 2019 to September 2020, the US forces operational challenging, quote, 28 different excessive maritime claims made by 19 different claimants throughout the world. Therefore, let me ask you a very, very simple question in a very, very tender tone. If the convention is good, why don't you ratify it? If it is not good, why would you challenge others in the name of it? China probably is the only country that has responded militarily to American provocations. There were deadly aircraft collisions in 2001 and a number of dangerous encounters at sea. For over 2 decades, the Chinese and American Navy's dialogues are useful but not fruitful. The reason is very simple. Americans want technical discussions on how to avoid close and dangerous encounters between the two navies, while China would point out that the American Navy's intense surveillance and reconnaissance in China's waters were provocation for China's sovereignty and should be stopped or at least reduced. Americans would ask China's ship to keep safe distance, and China believes that American ships are of course safe if you do not come at all. Neither China nor the United States want an accident. But the fundamental question exists from the very beginning. If the United States doesn't want the water to boil, why keep throwing wood into the fire? It is American ships that have come regularly to China's doorsteps and not the other way around. Therefore, I'm a bit pessimistic because I believe in theory, it is only a matter of time before the next crisis occurs. Why? Because risk reduction for Beijing and Washington is more difficult than that between the United States and the Soviet Union for two reasons. First, during the Cold War, there were clearly defined sphere of influence between Washington and Moscow, which allows them to avoid the direct confrontations, even if proxy wars happen elsewhere. But between China, even have a buffer zone in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Straits, where American naval ships sail regularly. Second, the United States and Soviet Union were balanced by mutually assured destruction, which is not found between Beijing and Washington. But in the Western Pacific, the gap in military strength is shrinking in China's favor, thanks to the advance of the PLA in the last 4 decades. A stronger PLA can only become more determined to safeguard China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Within the Western Pacific, there is no guarantee that the US military could win over the PLA. I'm not making an assessment, but this is an assessment of the numerous American reports that I have read the last couple of years. So if we cannot solve the problem, we can only try our best to manage a crisis, sliding into confrontations that neither wants. There is some light at the end of the tunnel. In October 2020, officials from China, defense officials from China and the United States had the first crisis communication working group meeting. This conference is good in that crisis is mentioned even at the title of the conference, because never before have we, because previously we seldom mentioned crisis, we instead mentioned accidents or incidents. So now we both recognize that there could indeed be crisis between us. The most significant part, however, is the so-called management of crisis, because that actually is a scenario to discuss what we shall have to do if a crisis indeed occurs. We have never discussed that before. So for China and the US to do deconflict at sea, I think both sides need to observe the mutually agreed rules and regulations, such as those found in CUES or ROB between China and the United States. The key, of course, is for ships and aircraft to keep safe distance. But here is the most tricky point. What is a safe distance? In CUES, we actually have laid down 7 elements that could affect safe distance, from visibility to maneuverability of both vessels and understanding of the maneuvering intention of the other vessels. Apparently, they require not only serious discussions, but also regular training to ensure good seamanship. The two militaries conducted joint drill on CUES in 2014, 2015, and 2016. Such exercises should continue, partly because a stronger PLA Navy is bound to meet the American Navy more often in the international waters in days to come. The organizer of the conference asked us to discuss the rule-based order in the new norm. So what is a new norm? The so-called free and open Indo-Pacific is not the new norm. It's the new myth. Ask yourself, when the Indo-Pacific is not open and free? Oceans are interconnected. In human history, few countries have attempted to block international straits or sea lanes. Although in recent years, we sometimes heard Iranians threatening to block Hormuz Strait, but they didn't do it. So most outstanding problem in the Indo-Pacific was piracy that was rampant in the Gulf of Aden and the Somali Basin from 2008 to 2013. I'm talking about Indo-Pacific. I'm not talking about the Gulf of Guinea. Now, the piracy is basically gone thanks to the joint efforts of the international navies, including China, and many countries represented at this conference. The free and open Indo-Pacific is, I believe, a semi-veiled attack on China, but it also comes at a cost of the centrality of ASEAN, which is supported by major powers in the region. The reason is very simple. Geographically speaking, if ASEAN lies at the heart of the Pacific, it cannot be at the center of the Indo-Pacific at the same time. It would be interesting to see how the Quad might evolve. I believe it is because of China if it is not against China. But if it is based upon a common resentment of China, then the glue that bound the four won't be strong enough. I can give one sentence. Quad is doomed if it is against China, because none of them would wish to sacrifice at least its bilateral economic relationship with China for the sake of all other three countries, period. Another new norm in our maritime domain tomorrow is PLA Navy getting stronger and stronger. Like it or not, admit it or not, this is the new norm for the world of tomorrow. China already has the largest number of ships in the world. It is aiming to become a world-class navy by mid-century, and we definitely can achieve that. Have we failed in any of our promises in the last 4 decades? We have realized all of them one after another, and this one for the future will also be realized. Rest assured with that. The question is what this means for the world. A more important role in safeguarding China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, but the PLA Navy doesn't need so many ships for Taiwan issue or for South China Sea issues. We want the world-class Navy for 2 more missions that is incumbent upon a major power, that is to safeguard China's ever-growing overseas interest and its international obligations. In our defense-wise paper, safeguarding China's overseas interest and participating in regional and international security cooperation have become, quote, strategic tasks of the PLA. Just now I have mentioned the new norm, that is PLA getting stronger and stronger. Another new norm is China is a new type of sea power which you haven't seen in history. China has no intention to police the world, but it stands ready to assist the world. That is why so far PLA's operations are all humanitarian overseas. Therefore, Chinese Navy won't attempt to control. It won't establish a so-called string of posts. So far, we only have one logistic base in Djibouti. And how many years have you heard the so-called string of posts? And where are they? Ask yourself. Instead, China will safeguard its overseas interest and shoulder its international obligations through international cooperation. Counter-piracy in the Indian Ocean is a brilliant example of how the Chinese Navy have cooperated with the international Navy in maintaining peace and stability. So counter-piracy can be explained in 3 ways. It is counter-piracy, it is also maintenance of sea lane of communication, and above all, it is safeguarding freedom of navigation. Thank you, Professor.
I thank Senior Colonel Zhou for his very strong statement. Before I open the floor for the Q&A session, I want to make one point. Colonel remarks are addressed to the United States. Unfortunately, we have no American on the panel. So in the interest of fairness, I will ask Jane whether there's anyone from the United States delegation at the conference who would like to exercise the right to reply to Colonel Zhou. Jane, please.
I will, Prof. I'll join Prof to welcome any comments and questions from the floor, please. No? Well, Prof, perhaps we give them a few more minutes to gather their thoughts. Yes, one up front in the first row, please.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Sir, please identify yourself and your affiliation, please. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Admiral Vantier. I'm the head of the French Navy. As it has been said in the panel, the main response to COVID crisis has been governmental, and this response has produced massive that are very difficult to take in account by navies and seafarers. As far as UN has both promoted UNCLOS and built the World Health Organization, do you think that UN should work on providing health rules of conduct for shipping and military port of visit that could be enforced worldwide in this post-crisis world?
Jane, can you
Yes, sir.
repeat the question, please?
So if I may, what I've heard is that, the question is whether the UN should also be looking into the post-crisis revival of the maritime industry. Is that right, sir? I'm sorry. Can we pass the mic again, please?
In fact, I stressed the point that all the rules that have been applied during the COVID crisis were national rules, and so they are different from a country to another. The maritime issues are global commons, and we have rules for territorial waters, for seafaring, that have been put in place by UN. UN has also has set up the World Health Organization, and so is able to promote health rules. And so, in the post-COVID world, my question is: should UN enforce rules for health for seamen worldwide that would help to have common rules for ports of visit and for seamanship?
Thank you. Thank you for your good question.
Yeah.
I think the two competent international organizations are the International Maritime Organization and the World Health Organization. And I believe that these two organizations have been consulting on the rules that will be applied in a pandemic to ships and to seafarers. I don't know whether Pahavas, Judge Peck, or Colonel Zhou would like to add to my remarks, please.
Yes, Prof. I think, there are another organization, I think the ILO, Prof.
Yes.
The IMO and the ILO, because the rule is actually very clear. Okay. You have the source, which is the UNCLOS, Article 98 on the protection life at sea, and then you have different elements under the IMO, and then you have another different element at the ILO. So I think in terms of rule is very clear. Okay, now probably what governments around the world need to see is how they can implement that on the ground. I think the rules are there. I don't think you need enforcement at global level because you are already obliged by the law of the sea, by the IMO rules, by the ILO rules. And I want to congratulate Singapore, Prof, for the initiative, because I really had the headache, the big problem when we are trying to save 2,500 plus Indonesian sailors scattered in vessels in Mediterranean Sea. Not easy. I think your example is a very good example.
Thank you, Pahavas. Judge Peck, you have any additional comment, please? Judge Peck?
No, I have no additional comment.
Thank you. Colonel Zhou, any additional comment?
Yes. Well, when I was coordinating counter-piracy in the Gulf of Aden, I'm aware that International Maritime Organization has actually issued 4 brochures on best protection management. The latest one is the BMP4 at that time. So that means the maritime industry has to make tactical arrangements regarding COVID. But in terms of general rules, I personally do not believe it is necessary. We have to follow the rules, and the rules are already in UNCLOS. You see, the whole point about UNCLOS is that even if people agree to the same term, it means different things for different people. So when we talk about a rule-based international order, we have to specify what rules exactly or specifically. Unless until we come to discuss about all these, we won't be able to reach agreement. For example, about Article 58, China and the United States have a strong disagreement regarding freedom of navigation over flight. And we even use the same article to attack each other. Because when you say you have a right, including naval vessel, we said, no, it's not written there. And we have differences also in peaceful use, due regards. In all these terms, we have differences.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
So we have to make a balanced approach. Do not use this kind of generalization to demonize other people. You won't succeed because it's too cheap to do that.
So I thank our French colleagues for asking the question. And I think to summarize, the reply is that 3 international organizations, IMO, WHO, and ILO have met, and they have formulated certain rules and norms for the behavior of ships, seafarers in the pandemic. Can I have the next question, please?
Yes, Prof. Sir?
Hi, Prof.
Yes.
It is Admiral Aaron Beng, Singapore Navy. I
Oh,
think first
Admiral
off,
Beng, yes.
since I have the mic and since my colleagues organized this event, I just wanted to, I think, first say thank you to you for joining us for the second time. I think it is very good to have somebody of your stature and esteem join us and to be able to speak with your direct experience on UNCLOS. From the floor here, Topo, I think it's good to see you again. But I'm going to make a comment on one of the statements you made. And on this, I take a different view or slightly of what you said. So you've highlighted the strength of UNCLOS, I think the amount of negotiation that has gone into it, the strength of this international law that so many countries have signed on. But you also made the point that there's different interpretations of the law. I think we don't disagree with that. But there's an extrapolation in what you said, that because there's a diversity of views, there is no one standard of the law. It's interpretation. That might be true from your perspective, but I think from Singapore's perspective as a small nation, I think that's a very dangerous view to hold. While there may be reasons for difference of interpretation, whether historical practice or national interest, I think as people who believe in a rules-based order, our approach must then be to seek clarity and alignment on what that law is. And in the process of disagreement, it should not, I think, lead to us straying away and undermining the strength of the law. Because, as you said, UNCLOS was a very hard-won argument by many countries over 9 years. If all of us who sign on to it start to walk away, the next time we try to renegotiate a document as huge as that, I don't know whether it'll take 9 years or 90 years. And if we do not have a standard of reference like that to refer to, I think the world will be the worse for it. Thank you.
I thank Admiral Beng for his statement, and I thank him for giving the value and respect to the importance of UNCLOS. I think what Colonel Zhou is saying that this is a very complex treaty, and some of the provisions are somewhat ambiguous, so different people may have different views, which is to be expected. But it doesn't mean that all views are equally valid, you know. And there is a manner in which if countries have disputes over the interpretation, the application of the convention, there is a system of dispute settlement. Yeah. So, and the dispute can be referred either to conciliation, mediation, arbitration, or adjudication. So, one problem which I like to raise for Colonel Zhou is that one problem we have with China is that China will not agree to refer any disputes with another state over territory to a binding third-party procedure, either to arbitration or to adjudication. And as Judge Baek said in his speech, one of the three criteria for a country to qualify as one which respects the rule of law is to agree to submit disputes which cannot be resolved by negotiation to arbitration or adjudication. So over to you, Kanoto.
Thank you, Professor Goh. Thank you for raising a very important questions. Yes, indeed. If we have a problem, people normally try to resolve it between themselves or go to the court. That is common sense. But in terms of UNCLOS, it's not for resolving territorial disputes. That is why China has actually made a declaration as early as 2006, making a reservation about any sea boundary delimitation or territorial disputes under Article 298, which is allowed by international law. So with all my respect for my friend Admiral Ben, I wish to say that actually people could have different understanding of UNCLOS. And that is why I raised von Bismarck's remarks. Because, for people to negotiate for 9 years, people really want to make a conclusion. So that is why they deliberately make some ambiguities where people could, explain them flexibly according to national interest. China is not against the UNCLOS. China is not opposed to rule of laws because China has ratified it, right? So China would accept the rules, but the interpretation is different. For example, India would talk almost like the United States about rule of law, so on and so forth. But India also have a reservation for the same article, Article 298. And India also talk about a free and open Indo-Pacific. But what happened? In April, the USS John Paul Jones challenged India's exclusive economic zone. That means at least in the eye of the United States, the Indian Ocean is not so free, not so open because of India. And India's exclusive economic zone, how large is that? It's 1/30 of the Indian Ocean. So that means for the United States, 1/30 of Indian Ocean is not so free and not so open, at least in the eye of the United States. So would India now still say free and open Indo-Pacific? So now let me come to my basic point. Oceans are interconnected by nature. It's not because you have coined a free and open Indo-Pacific, therefore it will become open and free. It is always open, it is always free. Thank you.
Kanoto, for the sake of our friends who are not experts in the law of the sea and who do not know UNCLOS well, will you allow me to just try to explain
Yes, please.
what it's all about? UNCLOS, as you say, UNCLOS took 9 years to negotiate. It's a very long and complex treaty, and it contained many unique features. One of the unique features is that under UNCLOS, unlike some other treaty, there is a system of compulsory dispute settlement. So when Singapore became a party to UNCLOS, we are bound by this system of compulsory dispute settlement. However, as you pointed out correctly, there is an Article 298. And under Article 298, there are three exceptions to this system of compulsory dispute settlement. One is if the dispute is over military activities. Second, if the matter is before the UN Security Council. And third, if the dispute is over maritime delimitation. And China made a declaration under 298 quite correctly that in the case of a dispute over maritime delimitation, China would not accept compulsory dispute settlement. It's okay to do that because many countries, including France, Singapore, Australia, have made the same declaration, But if the dispute is not over maritime delimitation, then China cannot say, I'm protected by 298. 298 only protects you if the dispute is one over maritime delimitation. I think I made it clear, right?
That's right. but China consider the Philippines suing China is fundamentally about the territorial disputes. Therefore, it is not included by the rules of UNCLOS. So we consider it's about a territorial dispute.
I don't want to speak on behalf of the Philippines, but I would explain the situation like this. The Philippines in 2013 decided to initiate arbitral proceedings against China under UNCLOS. And it invoked UNCLOS and Annex 7 to compose an arbitral tribunal to consider the case. China said no. This dispute is over maritime delimitation, and therefore you can't do this. And the Philippines said, no. If you read my statement of claim carefully, it has nothing to do with the maritime delimitation of the law of the sea. So there's a fundamental disagreement about what's the nature of the dispute. Is it over maritime delimitation, or is it over other aspects of the law of the sea, So under UNCLOS, when there is a disagreement, the disagreement will be settled by the tribunal itself and not by the parties. In other words, it's not for China or Philippines to say, I'm right and you're wrong. It's for the tribunal to decide who's right and who's wrong. Yeah.
And that is because we believe Philippines' claim is essentially about a territorial dispute, so China decided not to participate.
Yeah.
What you said is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
You have described the whole procedure as a whole background story, but what I'm saying is also China's government's official position.
I understand, China.
You understand.
Okay, thank you. Let's go on. Let's have another question or comment from the floor. Jane, anybody else from the conference?
Any hands up? Perhaps we can go to the virtual discussion board.
Can we go to the chat box? Are there any questions on the chat box?
Yes, there are quite a few, Prof.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Let me see all the questions.
Perhaps I can draw one for you first. Yes, Prof.
Yeah, why don't, I find it difficult to read this fine print. So Jane, why don't you tell us what the questions are? Take it slowly, one by one.
Sure. Well, Senior Colonel Cho, we have a lot of questions for you, so please be patient with me. I'll collate quite a few of them. The first one is really with your reference to UNCLOS and international law, and how the picture that you have painted for us is of maritime order from the Chinese perspective. And then we have also heard, Judge Paik and, Ambassador Hava spoke about maritime order from a rather different perspective, right? So in that sense, Senior Colonel Cho, in your view, how is China supporting UNCLOS and the, in particular when you are talking to, Southeast Asia, where the rights of coastal states are, to a certain extent, right now currently being debated, yeah? And another question is how, China rejections of the 2016 arbitral award, do you see that, it is in a way, raising a serious question about the effectiveness of the UNCLOS regime? Maybe we should start with that too first, Senior Colonel.
Let's wait, Jane. Colonel Cho has been doing a lot of talking. Are there any questions for Judge Paik and Pahavas first?
Give me a minute, Prof.
Okay.
Yes. Actually, we have a question from Shariman Lokman from ISIS Malaysia, Pak Havas, an old friend of ours. Shariman's question is, you mentioned about the troubling erosions of the capacity of countries to enforce the RFMO, right? And he's wondering whether, you could share your view on the prospects of establishing, a RFMO perhaps in Southeast Asia and maybe in the South China Sea. Pak Havas, please.
Pak Sariman, how are you, Pak? I think we have flouted the idea, I think, all the way back in the 90s when we had the discussion with Pak Hasim Jalal on the workshops. So regional fisheries in South China Sea, for instance, it was discussed, but and somehow did not materialize. And then we have the Southeast Asians fishery management, I think, based out of Bangkok, for instance. So it's an idea that has been there for a while, and environment is a very important issue. Fishery is a very important issue in our part of the world. So, that would also be a very good aspect to think through, because it's not a issue that it's a different interpretation, if you will. You have the FAO, you have the UNCLOS, and I think it's something that the country has been discussing it for a while. Now, while I have the floor, Prof. Tommy, I would like to share our view on the history of UNCLOS. Of course, you are there yourself. As a younger generations, I was not there, but when I asked Pak Hasim, and when I asked Pak Mohtar in the past, and when I asked also Judge Satyanandan, if I look also at our own history, we are very proud of the process of UNCLOS, because it is not created by the West. I think this is something that is very important to underline, because when we gained our independence in 1945, we were given by the Western colonial power an islands and 3 nautical miles. That's it, So we fought very hard, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, along with Fiji. And then we had some ideas coming from Africa, Kenya, maybe, Prof, if I could correct me wrong about EEZ. So we had bonus, we had a bonus of suddenly EEZ 200 nautical miles. It was not Indonesia's idea. It's not coming from our part of the world, but it comes from different parts of the world. And then the idea from Chile, for instance, and then, of course, the extended continental shelf.
Yes.
So I would say UNCLOS is not all of them ambiguous. Let me give you an example of Article 47, or archipelagic baseline. It's very mathematical.
Yeah.
A country, Japan, for instance, or UK, cannot claim as archipelagic state, because the comparisons of water and land are not within the mathematical definitions of UNCLOS. We cannot have archipelagic baseline more than 125 miles with 3% rules, for instance. We have 10% rules of the archipelagic sea-land passages. These are mathematical, 10%, not 9, not 9.5, not 10.5, it's 10. And it's not subject to interpretation, it's just simply 10%. Are very specific. So that is only part of the archipelagic element of the UNCLOS. So even the whole process itself, it has a lot of influence from country who has just received independence or gained independence from the Western power. So I would say from Indonesian perspective, UNCLOS is very complex, but very complete. It represents our interests as developing countries. It represents our interests as countries that just came out from colonization. So that is why we use this as a single important reference in the rule of the sea. So I think it is very clear how we stand on this particular issue, Prof.
Thank you very much, Pak Havas, for your important statement. I cannot agree more with you that UNCLOS is not a product of the West. It was made by over 150 countries, developing countries. UNCLOS is not a mere codification treaty. It contained many new concepts of international law, like the archipelagic state concept. And I congratulate Indonesia for its very successful diplomacy in persuading the whole world to adopt this new concept and incorporate it into UNCLOS. Mahavas, you're probably too polite to raise this issue, but could you please enlighten us on the status of the dispute between Indonesia and China over fishing rights in the exclusive economic zone of the Natuna Island?
If you look at the geography, if you look at the convention law of the sea, we don't have any dispute with China in terms of our EEZ. We have disputes with Malaysia because we have not finished the EEZ line with the continental shelf line that we agreed with Malaysia all the way back in 1969, 1970. It was negotiated by Pak Mukhtar and Pak Hasim. I was only 5 years old at the time. We had already closed the continental shelf with Vietnam, but still talking about the EEZ. So we are working with Malaysia and also with Vietnam on the EEZ. It's a very long process of negotiations, Prof. Many pressures from Indonesia saying that we have to finish quick, but then again, we are looking at the law, we are looking at the UNCLOS, and of course, at the end, practicality, compromise, pragmatism is always comes up in any negotiation, even in a tough negotiation of maritime boundaries, as my personal experience has. But we don't have any under UNCLOS, other than with Malaysia and Vietnam in Natuna. We have seen problems of fisheries, illegal fishing, for instance. In South China Sea, we see typically actually from Vietnam, from Thailand mostly, sometimes from China, not very often. Malaysia, very few. We have problems with Malaysia and the Straits of Malacca, Indonesian fishermen being caught in Malaysia and Malaysian fishermen being caught in Indonesia, or vice versa. We used to have a big problem with Australia, not so much anymore. We have some problem a little bit with the Philippines in the north of Sulawesi, but not so much recently. We are now, Prof, looking at European Union vessels actually in the northern part of Papua. So because of the subsidy that is allowed under WTO, the distant water fishing coming from Europe, going to Indian Ocean, going to the Pacific. So these are the new developments that we are getting.
Thank you.
That is the fishery issue that we face in the regions.
Thank you. Any question for Judge Peg before I call on Colonel Tong?
Yes, Prof.
Jane, any question for Judge Peg?
Yes, Prof. In fact, the original question that was addressed to Senior Colonel Cho is now rephrased for Judge Peg instead. Sir, in your view, China's rejection of the 2016 arbitral award, does that raise some serious question in terms of the effectiveness or the credibility of international regimes, international law, especially UNCLOS? Judge, please.
Well, thank you for this difficult question. In fact, Ambassador Koh explained the background of this arbitral case between the Philippines and China a few years ago. Ambassador Koh's explanation is absolutely accurate. There was different views between two parties with respect to whether arbitral tribunal has jurisdiction over dispute submitted by the claim submitted by the Philippines. All I want to say is, in the event of dispute over whether tribunal has jurisdiction or claim is admissible, it is the decision of the tribunal to settle that dispute. This is what you call compétence de la compétence. In the case of dispute over jurisdiction, it is the decision of the court. It is court to decide whether court has jurisdiction or not. So this is really one of the fundamental principles of international adjudication. In fact, the challenge to the jurisdiction of the court is very common. In fact, in many cases submitted to our tribunal, one party raised objection. This is what you call preliminary objection to the jurisdiction of court. In the latest case submitted to the tribunal, this is a dispute between Mauritius and the Maldives. Maldives raised preliminary jurisdiction to the jurisdiction of the court. Maldives argued that the tribunal has no jurisdiction over this dispute. Of course, Mauritius argued that tribunal has jurisdiction. So in such event, it is tribunal which decides whether it has jurisdiction. Therefore, when party believes that the court has no jurisdiction over the case, it should raise objection to the jurisdiction of the tribunal rather than abstain from the proceedings. That is what the party should do. Party should participate in the proceeding and raise objection to the jurisdiction. And if it prevails, the proceeding will terminate because the court has no jurisdiction over that dispute. So regarding the question just raised by the floor, I would say rejection of the decision of international court will not help the effectiveness of international adjudication. Decision of the court is binding. Therefore, parties to the dispute has obligation to comply with the decision. If party fails to do so, I don't think that will help effectiveness of international adjudication.
Thank you. Thank you. This session is supposed to conclude in 5 minutes' time, and session 4 will begin in 5 minutes. So in the remaining 5 minutes, I would like to give each of the 3 panelists 1 or 2 minutes to sum up his most important point of view. So I begin with Colonel Tsong. Colonel Tsong, could you just say in what's your most important message or point that you want to leave with us this afternoon?
My main point is China ratifies UNCLOS. In spite of disagreement to some of the articles, in spite of declarations, China strongly support UNCLOS. China strongly support rule-based international order, which needed to be discussed in details rather than be used as an instrument to demonize others. Regarding whether China's refuse would affect UNCLOS credibility, I would say no, because China believes it has nothing to do with UNCLOS. Therefore, it won't affect UNCLOS credibility. So, in one word, when we come to have a problem, we need to discuss them. I won't say on behalf of the other countries, the other 25 or 26 countries I mentioned. The difference between China and these countries is that they all object to foreign military activities, exclusive economic zone, but China is the only country that has the guts to voice its disagreement and oppose it militarily. That's the only difference. This does not mean that other countries would like Americans follow us, but they did not say it. That's the only difference.
Thank you, Colonel Cho. Pahavas, 1-2-minute summation. What's your most important message to us today?
Thank you, Prof. I think coming from the real topic of our discussion, which is the new normal, when the new normal today is we have to live with COVID, whether we like it or not, until it's really gone, which I don't know, will we ever have a world without COVID? And the world with COVID has actually impacted implementation of UNCLOS, as we have seen, on humans, on the front of the crew, passengers, on people trafficking, and also for creating pressures for our natural resources in this regard, fisheries. I imagine there are other elements of ocean life and implementation of UNCLOS that are being affected. I think it is important for member states of UNCLOS to look at this new normals, living with COVID seriously, and try to find practical measures on how you implement that. I think is the most important aspect that we need to see in the future. And of course, in regard to UNCLOS itself, as you know, Prof, along with Mohtar and Hasim, Indonesia, of course, is a faithful country to UNCLOS. We are very much in the process of making it in big parts of it. So Indonesia will continue to uphold the conventional law of the sea.
Thank you. Thank you, Pahavas. Judge Ping, you have the last word. Could you, in 1 or 2 minutes, sum up what are your main messages to us today?
Thank you. For rules-based maritime order, law, institution, and attitude of states, all three are important. Law, UNCLOS is not perfect, but I think it is solid basis for rule-based international maritime order. Institution, again, not perfect, but we have various institution agency. In particular, there is comprehensive dispute settlement system. Third, attitude of state. A state which is not yet party to the convention should join the convention as soon as possible. A state which has joined the convention should fully, faithfully comply with the convention. In case of dispute, states should refer that dispute to dispute settlement system rather than unilaterally trying to interpret and apply the convention.
Thank you, Judge. Those are very wise words. With those words, we conclude the session. Can I turn it over to Jane? Jane, can you bring this to a close?
Sure, Prof. Well, we have had, a which has painted, a rather different picture, in my mind at least, what maritime order should look like, even though, international law, international rules are supposed to be, interpreted and applied consistently. So in that sense, I think this conversation is to be had longer and more in-depth. Unfortunately, the session is as short as it is for us today. And we hope that, we can continue to carry this particular conversation in different forums, be it here in Singapore and outside of Singapore as well. With that, please join me in thanking, our panelists in our usual manner, and also, for all of you who have participated in the Q&A actively. Thank you very much.